In the ruins of post-war Germany, 1946, a small boy crept through the rubble of a once proud city under the cover of night. The air still smelled faintly of gunpowder, and the sound of distant boots on broken bricks echoed like ghosts of the war that had ended only a year earlier. For many, the war was over, but for others, especially children, the struggle for survival had only begun. This is the remarkable historical account of a hungry German boy who stole food from a U.S. Army base, and the American soldier who caught him. But instead of punishing him, that soldier made a choice that would change both of their lives forever. What started as an act of desperation became a story of kindness, forgiveness, and the quiet rebuilding of humanity after one of history's darkest times. In 1945, Germany lay in ruins. The mighty cities, Berlin, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Munich, had been reduced to piles of bricks and dust. Bridges were blown apart, roads crumbled, and entire neighborhoods vanished under bombing raids. The people were exhausted, traumatized, and starving. Millions of men were dead or missing. Women and children wandered through the ruins looking for shelter and scraps of food. The Allies, America, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, had divided Germany into 4 occupation zones. The U.S. controlled the southern and central regions, including parts of Bavaria and Hesse. For many Germans, the presence of foreign soldiers was a daily reminder of defeat. Yet for countless others, those same soldiers represented their only hope of survival. Amid all this chaos lived a 12-year-old boy named Karl Muller. He had once lived in a cheerful apartment with his parents in Frankfurt. His father had been drafted into the Wehrmacht in 1943 and never came back. His mother had died in an air raid the year before the war ended. Alone, hungry, and wearing the same tattered clothes for months, Karl survived by scavenging through the ruins, stealing potatoes from market carts, and sleeping in bomb shelters. Every night, he heard the hum of U.S. Army trucks passing through the city. The Americans had set up a military base in an abandoned school nearby. Rumors spread among the hungry children that the Americans had kitchens full of bread, canned meat, and chocolate, things that Germans hadn't seen in years. One cold December night, Karl made a decision. He was tired of eating rats and moldy bread. He slipped through the shadows toward the base. The moonlight glinted off barbed wire fences, and the guard's flashlight scanned the area. He crouched low, heart pounding, and waited for the right moment. He saw it. The back door of the mess hall slightly open. He crawled inside. The smell of cooked meat hit him like a wave. His stomach growled. On a counter sat trays of leftover food, potatoes, gravy, and half a loaf of bread. He stuffed as much as he could into a small burlap bag. Just as he turned to leave, a deep voice barked, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Karl froze. Standing behind him was an American soldier, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a green uniform and holding a flashlight. The light hit Karl's face, revealing his pale cheeks and terrified blue eyes. The soldier raised his hand, signaling Karl to stop. "Drop it, kid." Karl trembled and dropped the bag. He expected to be beaten or dragged to a jail cell. Instead, the soldier walked closer, studying the boy carefully. "Jesus," he muttered softly. "You're just a kid." The soldier's name was Sergeant James Donovan, a 28-year-old from Chicago who had served in Europe since 1944. He had seen the worst of the war: Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, the liberation of concentration camps. He had seen starvation, cruelty, and death on every front. But what he saw in that boy's eyes wasn't defiance. It was desperation. Karl spoke in broken English. "Please, hungry. No mama, no papa." Donovan sighed. He could have easily handed the boy over to the military police. Instead, he picked up the bag and looked at the contents. "You wanted food?" Karl nodded, eyes wide and watery. And that's how it began.
Every morning, Carl came to the kitchen. He washed dishes, scrubbed floors, peeled potatoes, and carried supplies. The American cooks found him amusing, this little German boy with wild blonde hair and an eager smile. They called him Kid Carl. In return, they gave him food and sometimes old clothes. For the first time in years, Carl slept with a full stomach. Donovan took special care of him, teaching him simple English words: bread, knife, thank you. Carl learned quickly. Soon he began greeting every soldier with, "Good morning, sir." The soldiers liked him. Some even sneaked him chocolate bars from their rations. To them, Carl was a reminder that beneath the rubble and politics, there were still innocent people, children trying to survive. Over time, a quiet friendship grew between the boy and the sergeant. Donovan had no children of his own. His fiancée back in Chicago had left him during the war, unable to bear the uncertainty. For him, Carl became a reason to smile again. Sometimes Donovan would tell him stories about the tall buildings in Chicago, baseball games, and hamburgers. Carl listened eyed wide, fascinated by this world across the ocean. "America big?" he'd ask. Donovan laughed. "Big enough that you'd get lost for a year." By the spring of 1947, Germany had started to recover slowly. The Marshall Plan was being prepared, and the American presence was shifting from occupation to rebuilding. But hunger was still everywhere. Donovan often used his own rations to feed Carl and other local children. One day, a colonel visiting the base noticed the boy helping in the kitchen. "Who authorized that?" he demanded. Donovan stood firm. "I did, sir. The kid works hard and earns his meals. Better than seeing him starve outside the gate." The colonel frowned, but didn't argue. "Just make sure he doesn't cause trouble." After that, Carl became almost like a mascot of the base. He learned to read a bit of English, and in return, he taught the soldiers a few German words. On Christmas 1947, the soldiers pooled their money to buy Carl a small red coat and a pair of boots. Donovan even found an old bicycle and repaired it for him. It was Carl's laughter filled the courtyard that winter morning as he rode the bike around the base. It was the first time since the war he had laughed that freely. But the world was changing again. By 1948, the Cold War had begun, and tensions were rising between the Allies and the Soviets. Donovan's unit received orders to rotate back to the United States. When he told Carl, his face fell. "You go America?" he asked softly. Donovan nodded. "Yeah, kid, they're sending me home." Carl's eyes filled with tears. "I come?" The sergeant smiled sadly. "I wish you could, buddy, but it's not that easy." He reached into his pocket and handed Carl a small object, a pocket knife engraved with the initials J.D. "Keep this," he said. "It's from my dad. Maybe one day, when you're grown, you'll come to America and find me." Carl held it tight. "Thank you, James." Donovan knelt down, looked him in the eye, and said, "You're going to be okay, Carl. Be strong. Help rebuild this place. The war's over. Make sure it never happens again." They hugged briefly. Then Donovan boarded the truck that would take him to the port. As it rolled away, Carl ran alongside until he couldn't keep up. He stood in the dust, waving the whole time until the truck disappeared. Years passed. Germany rebuilt itself brick by brick. The Marshall Plan transformed cities. Carl, now a teenager, worked at a bakery rebuilt with American aid. He kept the pocket knife with him always. He never forgot Sergeant Donovan, the man who turned punishment into mercy, hunger into hope. In 1955, when West Germany regained sovereignty, Carl joined a volunteer program assisting U.S. troops stationed in Europe. One day, while helping translate documents at a U.S. base in Munich, he came across a list of returning American officers. Among them was one name that made his heart skip: James Donovan. He wrote a letter, pouring out everything: how he'd grown up, how he remembered the soup, the kindness, the red coat, the bicycle. Weeks later, a letter arrived from America. Donovan was alive, working as a fireman in Chicago. He remembered Carl vividly. "You were the bravest little kid I ever met," the letter said. "I'm proud of you." A year later, with help from a church sponsorship, Carl finally made it to the United States. When he stepped off the train in Chicago, a tall man in his 40s was waiting at the platform holding a sign that read, "Welcome home, Kid Carl." They embraced, tears in both their eyes. From that day on, Carl lived with Donovan's family, helped in their neighborhood bakery, and eventually became a U.S. citizen. He told his story often, not to gain pity, but to remind people that even in times of war, kindness can rebuild what bombs destroy. Decades later, when Carl was an old man, a reporter interviewed him about his life during the occupation. He pulled out the same pocket knife and smiled. "This," he said softly, "was the first gift I ever received from an American. It saved my life, not the knife, but the kindness behind it." The story of Carl Muller and Sergeant James Donovan became a quiet legend passed among soldiers and locals alike. No medals were given, no headlines were written, but their small act of humanity spoke louder than any victory parade. Because sometimes the greatest battles are not fought on the front lines, they're fought in the heart. And that, my friends, is the powerful history of the German boy who stole food from an American base and the soldier who chose compassion over punishment. It's a reminder that in the ashes of war, the smallest act of kindness can rebuild what bombs destroy. If you enjoyed this historical account, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing real-life histories told here on History WWS, where we bring forgotten moments of humanity back to life.